Hey guys, tonight we begin with something equal parts bizarre and fascinating, strange medieval cures that somehow worked. Imagine you're living in a world where germs don't exist yet, at least, not in anyone's medical vocabulary. Where diseases are blamed on bad air, angry saints, or simply eating too many onions on a Tuesday. And the cures? Let's just say you're in for a ride. Take off your shoes and get ready, because tonight we're starting with hot foot baths. Sounds relaxing, right? Well, not quite. In the age of the Black Death, when entire towns were going belly up faster than a rotten fish market, one surprisingly common belief was that the plague entered your body through the soles of your feet. That's right, according to many medieval physicians, your toes were tiny front doors for death. So what was the logical next step? Boil them. Literally. Foot boiling wasn't just a rustic spa treatment gone wrong, it was serious business. You'd sit on a wobbly wooden bench, maybe in a dimly lit monastery room, and dunk your feet into a bubbling vat of herbed water hot enough to make a lobster reconsider its life choices. Sometimes they used mustard seed, rosemary, vinegar, even garlic. Because if the pain didn't scare the plague out, maybe the smell would. You'd probably wince, curse, and scream. But you wouldn't be alone. This was done to kids, elders, even the mayor if he looked a little pale. And here's the twist, while it didn't exactly stop the plague, since that was caused by Yersinia pestis and not ghostly foot breezes, it did help in one specific way. The herbs and heat improved circulation and sometimes helped treat early symptoms of fevers or limb swelling. A few lucky folks probably survived, not because of the boiling, but because the body got a nudge toward healing. Now, historians still argue whether this practice did anything substantial or if survivors just had strong immune systems and tough skin. But if you lived in medieval Europe and heard your neighbor had a little cough, you might have already been heating the cauldron. Because superstition plus desperation equals some toasty toes. And then there's the fringe angle. Monks in certain Italian monasteries claimed that heated foot baths also drove out demons of melancholy. One 13th century scribe swore his cousin's depression lifted after a 3-day foot cooking regimen. Sounds more like scalded feet made him forget about his sadness, but hey, pain is a great distraction. Add to that the ambience, Gothic arches overhead, flickering torches casting shadows, and the bubbling sound of foot stew echoing off the stone walls. You'd almost think you were in a medieval spa, until someone brings out the leeches. Let's not get ahead of ourselves, though. You're still seated, feet in boiling broth, trying not to yelp every time the apprentice tops off the pot. Around you, others soak in silence or mutter prayers. You notice a monk stirring herbs with what looks suspiciously like a spoon used for soup earlier. And then, one man lets out a blissful sigh. Is he healed? Or just numb from the ankles down? Hard to say. Of course, there were side effects. Burnt skin. Secondary infections. That one time someone boiled their boots and never mentally recovered. But among the madness, a few people genuinely walked away better. Coincidence? Maybe. But in a time when doctors were still prescribing crushed emeralds and powdered mummy, a hot foot bath wasn't the worst idea on the menu. And you? You're sitting there, medieval towel draped over your shoulders, wondering if maybe your headache is retreating. The monks nod wisely. The spirits have fled through the toes, one whispers. You nod back. Or maybe I just stopped eating moldy cheese. But you don't say that out loud. No need to start another exorcism. Your feet are finally dry, maybe a bit singed, but you're still sniffling, and there's a suspicious swelling under your arm that's starting to whisper plague. What now? The monks glance at each other solemnly, and then, with the gravity of seasoned barbers who moonlight as battlefield medics, they pull out their secret weapon, a lump of old bread. Yes, bread. Specifically, mashed up, stale as sin bread mixed with herbs, maybe some wine, and occasionally a splash of holy water, because hey, it couldn't hurt. This pulpy mess was then slapped directly onto wounds, boils, inflamed joints, basically anything that looked like it was trying to escape your body. This, dear listener, is the medieval bread poultice. A cure so low-tech and low-cost it could have been marketed as the original DIY health hack. You'd lie still, bread mash warming on your infected skin, while the healer whispered Latin phrases and reapplied the compress every few hours. The goal? Draw out the bad humors, of course. Or pustular spirits. Or just plain pus, depending on your healer's bedside manner. Here's the wild part, it actually worked. Sometimes. Modern historians and medical researchers admit that certain poultices, especially those using ingredients like garlic, honey, or moldy bread, contained antimicrobial properties. Yes, moldy bread. As in the precursor to penicillin. Without knowing why, these medieval medics were sometimes doing the right thing for the wrong reasons. Imagine that. You're in a mud-walled cottage, lying on a straw mattress, and some guy named Brother Thomas has just applied a bread and honey poultice to your festering leg wound. And 2 weeks later, the swelling goes down. You live. Now, historians still argue whether the success was thanks to the ingredients, the warmth, or just blind luck. One Oxford scholar even suggested that certain monastic recipes were passed down secretly for centuries, improving gradually, not through science, but by remembering what didn't kill the last guy. And of course, the fringe details get weirder. In 12th century Bohemia, a certain priest insisted that poultices worked better if the bread had been stolen, something about stealing life force from the loaf. Meanwhile, in rural France, people believed poultices needed to be mixed counterclockwise to avoid summoning malicious yeast spirits. Can you imagine your wound actually getting cursed because the cook stirred it wrong? Classic medieval. But you're lying there, the poultice cooling gently, and you begin to notice something odd. The pain isn't worse. The swelling hasn't grown. In fact, your fever feels lower. Brother Thomas smiles, a rare expression, somewhere between relief and smugness. Told you, he says. This batch had extra time. Around you, other patients groan, wheeze, or mutter prayers. The room smells like soup and regret, but there's a quiet faith in the method. After all, in a world without penicillin, you take your chances with bread. At worst, it was soothing. At best, it was miraculous. And, let's be honest, probably less traumatic than the next option. Spoiler, it involves a chicken. Still, you can't help but marvel at the practicality of it. Bread was everywhere. It was cheap, portable, and soft enough to mold into body-hugging lumps. Add herbs like sage or marjoram, and you had a cure that at least felt like medicine. And when paired with prayers, candles, and maybe a relic or two, it felt downright holy. If nothing else, you knew it wasn't poison. That was progress. And so, with your leg wrapped in fragrant, squishy carbs, you close your eyes and drift off, not quite healed, but at least a little hopeful. Maybe tomorrow will be better. Maybe they'll finally find that stolen loaf Brother Thomas keeps blaming for the plague. Or maybe, just maybe, you'll wake up feeling slightly less medieval. You wake up with the faint smell of sourdough clinging to your leg. The bread poultice is half dry, crusty, and looking more like a failed casserole than a medical treatment, but hey, you're still alive. That counts for something. Except now there's a new concern. The entire town is coughing, someone's definitely dead in the next room, and Brother Thomas just handed you a necklace made entirely of garlic. And no, he's not worried about vampires. Garlic necklaces were one of the most eye-watering, nose-clearing, and unintentionally useful medieval medical accessories. Strung like pungent pearls, they were worn around the neck to ward off illness, particularly the plague, and evil spirits, which were often considered one and the same. The theory? Bad air, or miasma, caused disease. This was before germ theory ruined everyone's fun with facts. In medieval times, people genuinely believed that if you breathed in putrid air, your body would start rotting from the inside. So, to counteract it, they surrounded themselves with even more pungent aromas, because obviously, nothing screams health like smelling worse than your symptoms. Garlic, of course, was the go-to. It was sharp, spicy, and offensive enough to clear a room. And hilariously, it did have real antibiotic and antifungal properties. The compound allicin, which gives garlic its kick, is a natural bacteria killer. So while people were wearing it for metaphysical protection, they were also, accidentally, disinfecting their airspace. Brilliant, if you overlook the breath. Now, you might think wearing raw garlic on a rope sounds harmless, until you realize it had to be replaced daily. That's right. Each morning, someone had to slice open fresh cloves and rethread them onto hemp or twine. In noble households, this was a servant's job. In peasant homes, well, you did it yourself or asked your neighbor, assuming they weren't unconscious from the smell. And the results? Mixed, as you'd expect. Some folks swore by it, claiming they felt stronger, breathed easier, and stayed plague-free longer than garlic-less neighbors. Others just liked that no one sat next to them anymore. Historians still argue whether garlic acted as a rudimentary air filter, or if its success came from limiting human contact due to the stench. Quirky fact time: in some towns, people hung garlic from doorways, windows, even babies' cribs. One 14th century parenting manual earnestly suggested rubbing garlic on an infant's feet to harden their constitution. Another entry claimed garlic kept away witches, which may or may not be a win depending on your dinner plans. In Italy, priests even blessed garlic during certain festivals, tying it into a neat little knot of culinary piety. Was it superstition? Absolutely. Was it functional? Also yes. And here you are, walking around with your garlic necklace swinging against your chest like a medieval mood ring. People avoid you. Dogs sniff and retreat. You feel vaguely powerful and slightly hungry at the same time. Brother Thomas gives you a thumbs up as he passes by, breathing through a garlic-scented rag tied across his nose. Does it make you feel better? Maybe. You're certainly not sharing your air with anyone. You may still cough, but you smell like you're fighting back. And in a world of bleeding, burning, and bird-based medicine, sometimes that's enough. You're standing in the courtyard now, fresh garlic swinging from your neck like the world's worst cologne, and you notice a crowd gathering around a patient on a straw mat. There's tension in the air, like something's about to be sacrificed. Spoiler alert, it's a chicken. And not in a soup. This, dear listener, is where things get truly clucking weird. Enter the live chicken cure, a medical practice that sounds made up, but was painfully real. The setup was simple. If you had plague buboes, those grotesque, swollen lumps that marked you as plague-stricken, the cure involved strapping a live, feathered, and very confused chicken directly onto the infected area. Usually, this meant under the armpit or along the groin. Yes. Just pressed right in there. Beak to boil. The theory was disturbingly straightforward. The illness would transfer from you into the bird. Chickens, you see, were thought to have an absorbent spiritual energy. Or maybe it was just desperation disguised as symbolism. Either way, the result was the same, one flapping, miserable bird tied to a miserable, flapping patient. Of course, one chicken wasn't enough. After a few minutes, or when the bird fainted from horror, you untied it, gently tossed it aside, and brought in a new one. It was like a poultry assembly line of despair. The process continued until the patient either recovered, gave up, or ran out of chickens. Here's the wildest part, occasionally, it worked. Not because the chicken had magic disease-absorbing feathers, but because the patient's immune system kicked in, or the lymphatic swelling drained on its own. And in a world of trial-and-error medicine, that counted as success. Now, historians still argue whether this was a psychosomatic improvement or just survivorship bias. But in certain French regions, records show chicken therapy had enough believers to become standard plague response. One medieval doctor even insisted that using a black chicken worked better because dark feathers attract dark humors. Science. And then there's the fringe. Some households believed the chicken must be fed specific herbs before strapping, like wormwood or sage, to prime it for disease extraction. Others swore the chicken had to be virgin. Yes, medieval people worried about poultry purity. Try explaining that to your dinner guests. The chicken, of course, did not appreciate its role in this drama. There are accounts of people being scratched, pecked, and occasionally pooped on during the treatment. One London man reportedly lost an eye in a chicken-induced panic. He recovered from plague but gained a permanent squint and a lifelong vendetta against poultry. And you? You're watching it happen now. A healer carefully binds a chicken to a boy's swollen armpit. The bird thrashes, then freezes. Minutes pass. The boy winces, breathes shallowly, and, miraculously, his fever begins to ebb. Coincidence? Divine intervention? Or just finally being left alone long enough to rest? Even in the Middle Ages, not everyone bought into the chicken plan. Some called it barbaric. Others just thought it was a waste of good livestock. But when plague was in the air and bodies piled up in the streets, anything that showed even a flicker of hope, be it bread, boiling, or birds, was worth a try. And maybe, just maybe, it worked because people believed it would. Because feeling cared for, attended to, and weirdly blessed by barnyard magic might have been the first step toward healing. Or maybe the chicken was just trying to fly away with your illness. Stranger things have happened. You've just witnessed a chicken get its own chapter in the book of medicine, and honestly, it's hard to unsee. But as the feathers settle and the coughing resumes, another medieval healer approaches, this time holding a stick of something blackened and brittle. He breaks off a piece and hands it to you with a deadpan look. "Chew," he says. You stare down at what appears to be a chunk of burnt wood. But nope, it's charcoal. And this, believe it or not, was the Middle Ages' answer to stomach issues. Indigestion. Chew charcoal. Ate something suspicious. Charcoal. Drank swamp water because Brother Thomas said it had healing properties. Better grab the whole bag. Medieval people didn't know the chemistry behind it, of course, but charcoal was a go-to remedy for stomach complaints, bloating, and even poisoning. They called it vegetable carbon in some circles, and it was one of those rare cases where folk wisdom and actual biochemistry accidentally lined up. Because activated charcoal, what we now use in emergency rooms, does bind to toxins in the stomach, keeping them from being absorbed. But this wasn't the nice, odorless, tasteless powder of today. No, you got a gritty, ashy chunk of wood. Usually from burned willow, oak, or fruit trees. And the texture? Imagine chewing sandpaper dipped in a fire pit. But if your belly felt like it was being cursed by a medieval gremlin, this soot snack was your best bet. Some healers sweetened the charcoal with honey or mixed it into wine, which helped mask the taste and soothed the throat going down. Others got creative, forming charcoal into little lozenges with herbs like fennel or mint. So yes, medieval tums existed, but they looked like something you'd find at the bottom of a fireplace. Historians still argue whether medieval charcoal was actually activated enough to treat serious poisoning. Most charcoal back then wasn't superheated the way it is today, meaning its absorption powers were limited. But even in its raw form, it could mop up some nasties. People who regularly chewed it claimed it soothed the bile, which in medieval terms meant it kept you from projectile vomiting after lunch. And of course, there's the fringe. One 14th century German manuscript swore charcoal only worked if burned during a full moon. Another English herbalist claimed that if you said a prayer while chewing it, something about Saint Bridget, it worked faster. Spiritual metabolism, if you will. Now, imagine the scene. You're walking through a plague-worn village, stomach rumbling like an angry bard, and you spot a cart selling tiny bundles of soup-wrapped twigs labeled God's Guts. That's what some peddlers called charcoal-based remedies. You buy one, chew dutifully, and feel the bubbling settle. Is it the charcoal? Is it the placebo effect? Is it just that you haven't eaten squirrel stew today? Who's to say? Still, for all its grit and grime, this remedy probably saved more lives than it harmed. Especially in a world where cure often meant burn it, drain it, or scream into the void. Chewing charcoal might have tasted like punishment, but it didn't make you bleed, blister, or share a bed with a pigeon. That's a win. You spit out the last bit, your teeth now charmingly tinted with soot, and you can't help but think, for all the weirdness, that little piece of wood just might have been the sanest thing you've tried this week. You've rinsed your mouth, spat out the charcoal grit, and are now pacing the monastery hall with a stomach that's marginally more cooperative. Around you, people sneeze, cough, and mutter complaints about the weather, demons, and soup. But the real concern? The air. It's thick, it's stale, and according to every medieval doctor worth his salt and his comically long hat, it's the air that's trying to kill you. So what's the next line of defense? onions. But not just any onions. These are special onions, guardians of your home, your lungs, and possibly your eternal soul. The medieval remedy goes like this: take a few large onions, slice them in half, but not too deep, and place them at the corners of your house. That's it. No potions, no chanting, no wrestling with poultry. Just place and wait. The belief was that onions absorbed miasma, or bad air, the invisible enemy that brought sickness, despair, and a general sense of doom. To your modern ears, this probably sounds like old wives' nonsense. But here's the kicker: it wasn't entirely wrong. See, onions do have mild antimicrobial properties. They emit sulfur compounds, which can, in a closed space, interact with bacteria floating through the air. The science is still a bit fuzzy, but under certain conditions, they might reduce airborne pathogens. In other words, if you're stuck in a one-room hut with a fireplace that's just smoke cosplay, putting onions on the floor isn't the worst plan. Historians still argue about whether this cure was functional or pure folklore. But there are accounts from plagues in 14th and 15th century Europe where households that kept the onion routine going were statistically less likely to suffer infection. Coincidence? Or was there some fringe logic hiding beneath those papery skins? And then there are the odd variants. Some folks believed the onion had to be blessed by a friar. Others insisted it must be grown on church soil. There was even one particularly superstitious village in the Alps that placed onions in little linen sacks and sewed them into their mattress seams. Keeps the air pure while you dream, they said. Or suffocates you gently in your sleep. It was a fine line. Of course, onions weren't just passive defenders. In desperate times, people ground them into pastes, smeared them on the chest, or boiled them into pungent teas. One noblewoman allegedly carried a roasted onion in her bosom like a plague-fighting perfume. Her diary claimed it kept her lungs light and unclouded. Her servants said she just smelled like lunch. And there's one more twist: some healers believed that if the onion turned black overnight, it had absorbed illness and should be buried immediately. Others thought it meant your house was cursed and needed resmudging with burnt rosemary. Either way, you were digging a hole at dawn. You, of course, are now staring at an onion on the floor. It's slightly shriveled, smelling like a forgotten cellar, and probably hasn't done anything measurable, but you feel better looking at it. Safer. Like maybe it's catching the invisible badness before it reaches your lungs. And that's the secret strength of these strange cures. Whether or not they held chemical power, they gave people a sense of control in a world spinning wildly off its axis. A cut onion in the corner wasn't just a vegetable. It was hope. It was protection. It was something you could do when the world offered nothing else. So you adjust your garlic necklace, nod respectfully to your onion bodyguards, and breathe a little deeper, trusting the air, at least for tonight. You've now got garlic swinging from your neck, charcoal in your teeth, and a house lined with onion landmines. Your body is, let's face it, a salad waiting to happen. But then someone sneezes near you, wet, emphatic, and horrifying. You need backup. Something strong. Something ancient. Something, apparently, made of pee. Welcome to one of the strangest, and oddly effective, medieval cures: urine mouthwash. Yes. You heard that correctly. In the Middle Ages, people genuinely swished their own, or someone else's, urine to treat mouth ulcers, toothaches, and even sore throats. Think of it as the medieval version of Listerine, but instead of minty fresh, you got whatever was in your bladder an hour ago. Now, before you recoil in permanent psychological damage, here's why they did it. Urine, especially the first morning variety, is sterile when fresh and contains urea and ammonia, both of which can act as antibacterial agents. Modern science backs this up to a disturbing degree. Urea-based creams are still used in dermatology today. So while you wouldn't want to gargle with it before a date, in a world without antibiotics, it wasn't the worst idea. In fact, one 14th century medical text described urine as God's own elixir, filtered by the flesh. Let that image marinate. Physicians, yes, actual physicians, recommended swishing warm urine daily to keep the mouth clean and the spirit humble. And if you had a sore throat, you drank it. Like a spicy, soul-shattering tea. Historians still argue about how widespread this practice was. Some say it was limited to the poorer classes, who lacked access to herbs and wine for sterilization. Others believe it was more common than anyone today is comfortable admitting. What's undeniable is that urine was considered not just waste, but a diagnostic tool and, in desperate moments, a remedy. Now for the fringe, some people didn't use their own. Oh no. They preferred the urine of children, believing it to be purer, especially from boys under the age of 7. There's even documentation of entire urine collection mornings at certain monasteries, which, if nothing else, must have made confession a little more awkward that week. Still, you're desperate. Your throat feels like it's lined with angry bees. Brother Thomas approaches with a small clay cup and the kind of look that says, "Trust me, I've done worse." You sip. It's warm. Metallic. Absolutely revolting. And yet, the burning sensation fades. Your breathing evens. You feel marginally less doomed. You rinse your mouth again with water, because, let's not get carried away, and think, maybe, just maybe, medieval people were onto something. Not everything, clearly, but something. And let's be honest. If you're willing to wear garlic, cuddle an onion, and tie poultry to your boils, a little urological intervention suddenly doesn't seem so crazy. It was survival, after all. And survival has always had a certain smell. Your breath now smells like a cursed tavern, and you've sworn off beverages for the foreseeable future. But your eyes, they're starting to itch, burn, water non-stop. Maybe it's the smoke from the cook fire. Maybe it's the lingering trauma from your latest mouth rinse. Either way, you're shuffled into a side room where the walls are lined with herbs, wax, and something that looks suspiciously like dried goat spleen. And right there, standing beneath a wooden crucifix, is a monk holding a smoking censer. "Don't blink," he says, "or do, this'll help either way." You're about to experience sacred smoke therapy, an oddly calming medieval treatment for eye ailments. This wasn't just ritual for the sake of ritual, it was medicine dressed up in incense and incantations. The idea was simple: certain types of smoke could soothe inflammation, cleanse the spirit, and, most importantly, irritate your eyes just enough to flush out whatever was in there. Camphor, sage, myrrh, and even juniper berries were tossed into the flames. The smoke was then funneled, sometimes gently, sometimes aggressively, toward your face. You'd sit still, teary-eyed and squinting, while someone whispered Latin prayers and waved a bundle of herbs like they were conducting a very small, sacred orchestra. And here's the curious part: sometimes it worked. Modern science suggests that some herbs used in these rituals contained anti-inflammatory or antimicrobial compounds. The heat and moisture from the smoke acted like a primitive humidifier, soothing dry eyes or even dislodging irritants. You weren't cured, exactly, but you felt better. You could blink again without weeping like a jilted troubadour. Historians still argue whether the prayers mattered as much as the herbs, or if the belief in the ritual was the real medicine. Some scholars propose that the ceremony created a placebo effect strong enough to override minor symptoms. Others point out that sage and camphor smoke genuinely reduced bacterial presence in controlled environments, which, for a monastery with no soap and way too many cats, was a win. But, as always, things could get weird. In rural Wales, certain rituals required the patient to keep their mouth open during the entire smoke treatment, so the devil may have an exit. In northern Italy, they believed that blowing smoke into both nostrils while reciting the names of archangels cured conjunctivitis. There was even a belief that if your eyes didn't water during the ritual, you had something to hide, either sin or syphilis. And of course, you couldn't just use any herbs. Rosemary was good for clarity. Thyme for purity. Mugwort if you thought your eye infection was actually caused by a witch's curse. These decisions were rarely based on logic and always based on what grew well behind the abbey. So here you are, eyes shut tight as fragrant smoke curls around your face. It's warm, soothing. You feel your sinuses open, your shoulders drop. A bell rings softly in the hallway, and the monk mutters something about Saint Odelia, patron saint of eye problems. You can't tell if it's the smoke or the prayer that's helping, but your eyes stop burning. For now. You leave the room blinking, your vision blurred but calm. Maybe your eyes are clearer. Maybe you're just high on juniper fumes. Either way, you feel lighter. And in the Middle Ages, that's as close to a cure as anyone gets. You've survived smoke, soot, and substances better left unmentioned, but today's cure is as fancy as it is ridiculous. The apothecary's assistant greets you with a goblet, eyes wide with importance. For your ulcers, he says solemnly, we've crushed the finest pearls. You blink. Pearls? Like ocean jewelry? Yes, he replies, holding up a small velvet pouch. Ground fine. Blessed. Stirred into wine. For internal refinement. This, believe it or not, is pearl medicine, an extravagant, shimmering quack cure reserved mostly for the rich, the desperate, or the absolutely out of ideas. It was used to treat fevers, ulcers, fainting spells, and female madness, a vague diagnosis that usually meant being alive while female in the 14th century. The process went like this: take genuine pearls, yes, actual pearls, crush them into a fine powder, and mix them with a liquid, usually wine, sometimes rose water. The result? A cloudy, chalky drink that promised strength, purity, and the ability to digest meat again without screaming. And here's the kicker, it wasn't all nonsense. Pearls are mostly calcium carbonate, the same compound found in antacids today. So if you had an ulcer, or even just horrible heartburn, this medieval luxury potion could actually soothe your stomach lining. Of course, the cost was roughly equivalent to a small village and a goat with performance anxiety, but it technically worked. Historians still argue whether the benefit came from the calcium or from the placebo effect of drinking a jewel. When you spend a king's ransom on your medicine, you want it to work. And sometimes, belief is the best ingredient. There were plenty of odd variants, too. In Persia, pearls were soaked in citrus juice to activate their energy. In France, alchemists tried to fuse pearl dust with gold flakes for an elixir of longevity. Spoiler alert, it did not work. But it did make your insides look like a treasure chest. In Italy, pearl powder was also mixed into face creams. Women smeared it across their cheeks, hoping for eternal youth. While this didn't rewind time, it did reflect light in flattering ways, giving the illusion of radiance. Medieval Instagram filters, basically. And, of course, fringe theories flourished. One noblewoman insisted her pearls had to be harvested by a virgin diver under a full moon. A Spanish manuscript warned against using left-turning pearls, which were apparently cursed. And in one German tale, a merchant who faked pearl powder with crushed chalk was cursed to burp dust for eternity. Justice, medieval style. So here you are, sipping your pearl wine in a candlelit room, surrounded by the scent of herbs and the soft crackle of logs in the hearth. The potion is chalky but not unpleasant. You feel it coat your throat, settle your stomach, and lull your nerves. Do you feel better? A bit. Are you about to cough up a sapphire next? Hopefully not. But in a world where chickens are doctors and onions are security guards, a sparkling sip of pearl isn't the craziest thing you've swallowed this week. You've officially had pearls for lunch. Your stomach is calmer, your breath still faintly garlic scented, and your bedroom smells like an herb garden got into a fight with a medieval smokehouse. But there's still the small issue of plague. It's in the village now, creeping like a fog, and someone just coughed in your general direction. Time to mask up, medieval style. Tonight's remedy is a cloth soaked in vinegar and tied around your nose and mouth, the rustic ancestor of today's N95. This wasn't just a random wet rag flung across the face. No, this was serious plague gear, vinegar rags, sometimes layered with herbs, spices, or even citrus peels, and tied tightly with strips of linen. The idea? The acidic fumes would neutralize bad air, miasma, before it reached your lungs. And surprisingly, this one wasn't all that off. Vinegar is acetic acid. It's antibacterial, antifungal, and known even today for its disinfecting properties. So in the land of medieval medicine, where effective often meant you didn't die immediately, vinegar rags were basically cutting edge. Here's how it usually went: a healer or priest, often wearing a long-nosed plague doctor mask stuffed with fragrant herbs, would instruct people to boil vinegar with ingredients like rosemary, thyme, or even wormwood. The resulting steam was either inhaled directly, which stung like snorting salad dressing, or used to soak cloths that you tied around your face. These rags became essential when burying the dead, visiting the sick, or just walking through the market. In some towns, vinegar-soaked sponges were kept in churches or shops, sniffed by parishioners or passed around like communion for the olfactory system. Just imagine the smell, part pickled vegetable, part hope. Historians still debate how effective this method truly was. Some argue the rags mostly worked by discouraging close contact. After all, nobody wanted to talk face-to-face with someone wearing a vinegar beard. Others suggest the acetic fumes did reduce bacterial exposure, at least a little. Either way, it was a better bet than chicken therapy. Of course, things got inventive. In France, perfumers began selling pre-soaked plague masks with extravagant scent blends. In England, a recipe called "for thieves' vinegar" became legendary, said to be used by a gang who robbed plague victims without getting sick. The mix included garlic, lavender, mint, and sage steeped in strong vinegar. True? Dubious. Marketable? Extremely. And let's not forget the fringe. One German mystic claimed that if you whispered the name of each herb into the cloth before soaking it, the spirits inside would protect you. Another recommended burying the vinegar rag in the garden after use, to return the death back to the soil. So here you are, tying a damp, sour-smelling cloth around your face. It drips a little, stings your lips, and makes your eyes water, but you feel safer. The air seems clearer. People keep their distance. And for once, your breath is less terrifying than what's outside. You walk through the village, the cloth pressed to your mouth, the scent of rosemary and regret lingering in every breath. You're not invincible. But for now, you're armed with vinegar, hope, and one more line of defense between you and the plague. And in this world, that's something to hold on to. It's hard to look stylish with a vinegar rag plastered to your face, but somehow you're managing it. You're practically the height of plague-era fashion. But despite the herbal glamour, your head is pounding, and your heart feels like it's auditioning for a drum solo. Enter the most infamous medical sidekick of them all, the leech. Ah yes, leeches, the little squishy vampires of the medieval world. Gross? Absolutely. But in certain cases, strangely effective. Leeches were used for centuries to balance the body's humors, those four mysterious fluids medieval doctors were always yelling about: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. Too much of one, and boom, sickness. The solution? Take out some blood. And if your knife was dull, your hand shaky, or your patient screamed too much, well, that's what leeches were for. These creatures weren't just picked from the swamp and slapped onto your skin, though, to be fair, that did happen. There was a certain technique involved. You'd visit your local barber surgeon, yes, the guy who cut your hair and your arteries, and he'd apply a few well-fed leeches to your skin, forehead, temples, under the ears, sometimes your buttocks if things were especially dire. And you'd wait. The leeches would latch on with microscopic teeth, suck until full, and then drop off with a burp. You, meanwhile, would lie there light-headed, bleeding gently, and hoping that your melancholia, or sacred fever, was being bled out along with the rest of you. But here's the part that gives this slimy solution some modern credit. Leeches produce a substance called hirudin, an anticoagulant that helps blood flow more easily. Today, leech therapy is still used in microsurgery to relieve blood clots and reduce tissue swelling. So the medievals weren't completely off base, they just didn't know which patients actually needed it. Spoiler, it wasn't everyone. Historians still argue over the medieval obsession with bloodletting. Some say it was a placebo effect with strong branding. Others believe doctors used it because, well, it looked like they were doing something. Bleeding felt active. Intentional. It was messy hope with suction. And of course, fringe lore abounded. In Eastern Europe, certain leeches were said to glow faintly in moonlight, making them ideal for nighttime bloodletting. In parts of Scotland, it was bad luck to kill a leech, especially one that had recently feasted on a widow. Don't ask. Leeches weren't cheap either. They were collected, traded, and kept in little glass jars filled with pond water. Some monasteries had entire leech rooms, where the slippery workers lounged until their next gig. And yes, there were specialists called leechers. Imagine handing out that business card at a medieval career fair. So here you are, sitting still as a monk carefully positions 2 fat leeches on your temples. They wriggle, sniff, probably, and latch on. It feels weird, like being gently kissed by a clam. But after 20 minutes, your pounding headache eases. Your face feels lighter. You may be leaking, but you're oddly serene. As the leeches fall off and wriggle lazily in their jar, the monk nods. They've taken the pressure, he says. You should sleep now. And you do. Because if letting a swamp noodle nibble your face brings peace, who are you to argue? You awake with 2 faint leech hickeys on your temples and the distinct sense that your brain has stopped trying to punch its way out of your skull. Progress. But this new day brings new troubles, a low fever, an ominous tightness in your chest, and a creeping anxiety that even the Onion Brigade can't seem to absorb. That's when a soft-voiced friar approaches, holding a chipped silver bowl of water. He makes the sign of the cross, murmurs a string of Latin you only half understand, and gently flicks the water in your direction. Holy water, he whispers. And prayer. For healing of the soul and body. You don't laugh. You're too tired. And besides, something about his calm demeanor and the cool mist on your forehead feels good. Comforting. Like someone's holding your hand from the other side of a very dark hallway. In the Middle Ages, prayer wasn't just a spiritual exercise, it was health care. Illness was often seen as divine punishment or a test of faith, and healing came just as often through rosaries and relics as it did through herbs and hacksaws. Holy water was believed to contain divine power, especially when blessed by a priest or sprinkled in sacred spaces. Its applications ranged from treating plague to exorcising demons to soothing boils. Quite the multitasker. And before you roll your modern eyes, there's something to be said for the power of ritual. Studies today confirm that belief, calm, and human connection can speed up recovery. The term placebo effect is modern, but the mechanics are ancient. When someone you trust looks you in the eye and says, "You will be healed," a part of you starts to believe it. And the body listens. Historians still argue whether prayer-based healing was mostly psychosomatic or occasionally miraculous. The Church documented many such events, though skeptics point out that monks also documented angels playing chess. Still, even the harshest critics agree, the mind can rally the body under the right conditions. And then there's the fringe. Some holy water was made from springs believed to contain the tears of saints. Others were mixed with ashes from burned scripture. In rural Brittany, one village used water collected from a statue's eyes during rainstorms. They called it Mary's Weeping. Results were mixed. Faith was not. Pilgrimages to healing shrines were also common. People limped for miles to touch a stone, kiss a relic, or sleep near the tomb of a reputed miracle worker. Did it always work? Of course not. But imagine suffering in a village where your local doctor is a guy who once lanced a goat, and suddenly you're surrounded by candlelight, singing, and hundreds of people believing alongside you. That alone could breathe life into your chest. So here you are now, lying on a straw-stuffed cot, soft chants echoing through the monastery, and the faint smell of myrrh in the air. You've been sprinkled, prayed over, and left with a small wooden cross tucked under your pillow. You don't know if it's curing your fever, but your shoulders have finally unclenched. For the first time in days, you exhale fully. Not because the holy water neutralized germs, or because the prayer rearranged your molecules, but because someone cared enough to try. And in a world of boils, bloodletting, and broths of questionable origin, that might just be the most powerful medicine of all. The fever lingers, stubborn and slick, like something with claws that's refusing to let go. You're too tired to walk, too sore to sleep, and Brother Thomas has started bringing you tea unprompted, a bad sign. That's when you overhear the dreaded words whispered by the infirmary cook, "We may have to cauterize." You freeze. Not because you know exactly what that means, but because any sentence that ends in eyes and starts with "quarter" is never followed by something cozy. Moments later, a grim-faced monk emerges from the shadows carrying what looks suspiciously like a branding iron. "To stop the spread," he mutters. "It's the only way." Cauterization in the Middle Ages was both medicine and spectacle, a brutal, brilliant, and horrifying way to stop infections. The concept? If something's infected, you burn it. Heat the wound, fry the bacteria, and seal off the flesh like a steak on a skillet. Crude? Yes. Effective? Sometimes horrifyingly so. They used fire-heated metal rods, boiling oil, or even scalding pitch. You'd bite down on a stick, be held still by two assistants, and then, hiss, the metal would sear your skin. Pain unlike anything else, smoke rising from your own body, and the unholy scent of cooking human wafting through the room. It was agony incarnate. And yet, it often saved lives. Because in an era before antibiotics, when a cut from a rusty plow could mean death by septicemia, cauterization was a way to survive. It stopped bleeding. It sterilized wounds. It sealed the skin against outside filth. If you didn't die from the infection, or the shock of the burn, you might just live. Historians still argue about how often this worked versus how often it simply delayed the inevitable. But there are plenty of documented cases where patients walked away scarred but breathing. And that, in the Middle Ages, was a miracle. The fringe lore, of course, is extensive. Some believed that uttering a saint's name while the iron touched the skin made the healing faster. In 12th century Spain, the metal was often blessed before use, just in case you burned the devil out along with the disease. One monastery kept a miracle rod rumored to have healed over 100 men without leaving a scar. Unlikely. But someone probably believed it hard enough to forget the pain. Different metals were used depending on your ailment. Bronze for lung ailments, burned into the chest, yes, really, silver for noble blood, and iron for peasants. There were even designs shaped like crosses, sunbursts, or animal heads, because why suffer without a little flair? So here you are, stripped to the waist, lying on a plank. The monk approaches with the glowing rod. You brace, grip the edges, and try not to scream. But you do. Everyone does. The pain is white-hot, primal. For a moment, you forget your name. And then, it's done. The burn hisses and bubbles. You sob into your blanket, and someone hands you a cup of watered-down wine. The monk murmurs a blessing, dabs honey on the wound, and wraps it in linen. Hours later, your fever drops. A little. The wound is angry, but clean. You may bear a scar, but you're alive. And in a world where most medicine feels like guesswork with extra drama, that's enough. The smell of scorched skin still lingers in the back of your throat like a memory you'd rather not unpack. But the fever's broken, your limbs aren't shaking like autumn leaves, and your appetite, miraculously, returns. Enter the herbal mud smear, a treatment that sounds like a spa day until someone brings out the fermented nettle paste. Medieval folks weren't big on understanding germs, but they knew this: if something hurt and got hot, slather it with muck. Herbal poultices were the medieval cure-all for inflammation, swelling, bruises, and general bodily displeasure. And while they varied wildly by region, one ingredient remained universal: mud. Rich, thick, gloriously sticky earth, often mixed with herbs, ashes, or even pig fat depending on your healer's mood and how desperate your condition looked. Today's mixture includes nettle, stingy but surprisingly therapeutic; yarrow, good for circulation; comfrey, nicknamed bone knit for its healing reputation; and a suspiciously green sludge made from boiled cabbage and mint. All of this gets slopped together and smeared on your aching limbs like an extremely committed prank. And wouldn't you know it, this one might have actually worked. Many of the herbs used in these smears are known today for their anti-inflammatory and antimicrobial properties. Yarrow, for instance, contains compounds that constrict blood vessels and reduce bruising. Nettle has antihistamines and anti-inflammatory agents. Comfrey stimulates tissue regeneration. In short, medieval people accidentally invented bioactive skincare while trying not to die. Historians still argue whether the benefit came from the ingredients themselves or from the heat-retaining properties of warm mud. Either way, patients reported reduced pain, better mobility, and in some cases, a noticeable lack of festering. But oh, the fringe practices. In Bavaria, smears had to be applied counterclockwise to align with the body's natural uncoiling. In parts of rural Wales, the poultice had to include soil from a graveyard, preferably from someone who died of the same ailment. Sympathetic healing, they called it. Creepy? Absolutely. Effective? You weren't exactly in a position to argue. One particular monk's journal described a cure paste that included earth from under an altar, ash from a sacred oak, and exactly 3 hairs from a black goat. He insisted it healed boils overnight. Others tried mixing in animal brains, snail slime, or wine-soaked bread crusts, because no one told medieval healers that kitchen sink wasn't a medical philosophy. And let's not forget the experience. The smear was thick, cold, wet. It soaked through linen like a vengeful pudding. You'd lie there wrapped in cloth strips, arms and legs immobilized like a cabbage burrito, and wait for the mixture to dry. Which it did. Eventually. Hard. Crusty. Sometimes with bits of straw or feathers clinging to your bandages because medieval hospitals were basically barns with a prayer schedule. But the next morning, you moved easier. The swelling was down. You smelled like salad dressing, sure, but you could walk. So here you are now, covered in earthy goop, lying still while a novice hums a hymn and fans your face with a palm frond. The poultice dries slowly, pulling gently at the skin. It's not glamorous. It's not even pleasant. But it's helping. And in the medieval healing Olympics, that's a podium finish. The smell of scorched skin still lingers in the back of your throat like a memory you'd rather not unpack. But the fever's broken, your limbs aren't shaking like autumn leaves, and your appetite, miraculously, returns. Enter the herbal mud smear, a treatment that sounds like a spa day until someone brings out the fermented nettle paste. Medieval folks weren't big on understanding germs, but they knew this: if something hurt and got hot, slather it with muck. Herbal poultices were the medieval cure-all for inflammation, swelling, bruises, and general bodily displeasure. And while they varied wildly by region, one ingredient remained universal: mud. Rich, thick, gloriously sticky earth, often mixed with herbs, ashes, or even pig fat depending on your healer's mood and how desperate your condition looked. Today's mixture includes nettle, stingy but surprisingly therapeutic; yarrow, good for circulation; comfrey, nicknamed bone knit for its healing reputation; and a suspiciously green sludge made from boiled cabbage and mint. All of this gets slopped together and smeared on your aching limbs like an extremely committed prank. And wouldn't you know it, this one might have actually worked. Many of the herbs used in these smears are known today for their anti-inflammatory and antimicrobial properties. Yarrow, for instance, contains compounds that constrict blood vessels and reduce bruising. Nettle has antihistamines and anti-inflammatory agents. Comfrey stimulates tissue regeneration. In short, medieval people accidentally invented bioactive skincare while trying not to die. Historians still argue whether the benefit came from the ingredients themselves or from the heat-retaining properties of warm mud. Either way, patients reported reduced pain, better mobility, and in some cases, a noticeable lack of festering. But oh, the fringe practices. In Bavaria, smears had to be applied counterclockwise to align with the body's natural uncoiling. In parts of rural Wales, the poultice had to include soil from a graveyard, preferably from someone who died of the same ailment. Sympathetic healing, they called it. Creepy? Absolutely. Effective? You weren't exactly in a position to argue. One particular monk's journal described a cure paste that included earth from under an altar, ash from a sacred oak, and exactly 3 hairs from a black goat. He insisted it healed boils overnight. Others tried mixing in animal brains, snail slime, or wine-soaked bread crusts, because no one told medieval healers that kitchen sink wasn't a medical philosophy. And let's not forget the experience. The smear was thick, cold, wet. It soaked through linen like a vengeful pudding. You'd lie there wrapped in cloth strips, arms and legs immobilized like a cabbage burrito, and wait for the mixture to dry. Which it did. Eventually. Hard. Crusty. Sometimes with bits of straw or feathers clinging to your bandages because medieval hospitals were basically barns with a prayer schedule. But the next morning, you moved easier. The swelling was down. You smelled like salad dressing, sure, but you could walk. So here you are now, covered in earthy goop, lying still while a novice hums a hymn and fans your face with a palm frond. The poultice dries slowly, pulling gently at the skin. It's not glamorous. It's not even pleasant. But it's helping. And in the medieval healing Olympics, that's a podium finish. The yarrow's bitterness still lingers on your tongue, but your body is calm now, pliant and slightly too warm in the way that says your fever's either ebbing or plotting a comeback. To keep the balance, the healer ushers you to a bubbling cauldron not filled with stew this time, but steam. Breathe deeply, she instructs, placing a towel over your head and lowering you toward a pot of fragrant vapor. Let the soup kiss your lungs. Welcome to medieval steam therapy, the closest thing to a spa treatment you're getting this century. The pot below is no simple broth. Floating in the water are bundles of sage, thyme, mint, rosemary, and maybe a questionable root or two for flair. This concoction isn't for drinking, it's for inhaling. The steam rises, fills the towel-draped tent around your face, and bathes your sinuses in a warm, herbal hug. And wouldn't you know it, this one really works. Steam therapy has been used for centuries to loosen mucus, open airways, reduce sinus pressure, and calm respiratory inflammation. Modern science gives this medieval method a cautious thumbs up. While it won't cure infections, it does provide temporary relief and can help the body expel gunk from congested passages. Basically, it's Vicks VapoRub without the branding. Back then, this was often the go-to for colds, fevers, and the infamous lung rot, a catch-all term for tuberculosis, bronchitis, or just having lived too close to sheep for too long. Patients would sit huddled over pots or in rudimentary steam huts, inhaling deeply and sweating profusely, sometimes until they hallucinated or felt cleansed by the saints. Historians still argue whether the herbs were chosen for their medicinal value or just whatever was growing closest to the apothecary's window. But several herbs used in these brews, thyme, for instance, are known antiseptics. Mint can soothe the throat. Sage has anti-inflammatory properties. And rosemary, well, rosemary was believed to strengthen memory and purify the air, even if it didn't do much for your phlegm. Fringe beliefs were abundant, of course. Some healers claimed you had to inhale with your left nostril only. Others insisted that to draw out truly stubborn spirits, you needed to chant psalms while fanning the steam with a goose feather. In Transylvania, people added crushed garlic to the pot, turning your lungs into a pungent fortress no vampire would dare enter. You stay under the towel, letting the steam soak your skin, fog your lashes, and melt whatever's been nesting in your chest. You cough once, then again, wet, productive, and oddly satisfying. Something dislodges. Your shoulders unclench. You sit taller. It's not a cure, but it's comfort. A ritual of breath and heat and herbs. And in a world where illness comes with fire and feathers and urine, oh, the urine, breathing in rosemary and mint feels almost civilized. The healer lifts the towel slowly, checking your eyes, your cheeks, your pulse. Better, she asks. You nod, blinking through the haze. Better. She refills the pot, tosses in a fresh sprig of sage, and motions for the next patient. Behind you, the room smells like an herbal forest in mid-boil. It's warm, alive. And for the first time in days, so are you. The steam has done its job, your lungs feel looser, your head less clouded, and for a brief moment, you smell less like a plague pit and more like a medieval herb garden. But that dry scratch in your throat? It's back. Persistent, annoying, and threatening to turn your newfound peace into another round of medieval medical roulette. Luckily, a passing nun notices your grimace and pulls something from the pocket of her apron, a stick. Brown, gnarled, and distinctly root-like. Chew this, she says. Licorice root. Sweet, softens the voice. Soothes the fire inside. You accept it cautiously, wondering if this is one of those moments where you're being tricked into eating someone's kindling. But the first bite surprises you, woody and fibrous, yes, but also strangely sweet. Licorice root, one of the oldest and most widespread herbal remedies in the world, was a medieval superstar, especially for respiratory issues. Unlike most things passed off as medicine in this era, licorice root actually tasted pleasant. People chewed it to calm coughs, clear mucus, ease ulcers, and even settle jittery nerves. It was used in teas, poultices, and even mashed into paste to spread over aching gums or chapped lips. And, modern spoiler alert, it wasn't just sweet placebo. Licorice root contains glycyrrhizin, a compound with anti-inflammatory, antimicrobial, and immune-modulating properties. In small amounts, it can help reduce throat irritation, soothe bronchial inflammation, and fight off minor infections. In large amounts, well, let's just say your kidneys might file a formal complaint. But for medieval dosages, it was impressively useful. Historians still argue whether its popularity was due to its medicinal effects or simply because people liked the taste. It was certainly easier to swallow than vinegar rags or snail slime. And in a world where every other treatment involved fire, feathers, or bodily fluids, a nice root to chew on felt downright luxurious. The fringe folklore didn't disappoint either. In parts of Italy, licorice was believed to carry the sweetness of the earth's breath. Poetic, if inaccurate. Sailors in northern Europe chewed it to prevent scurvy and calm seasickness. In the Middle East, it was revered as a sacred herb, used in religious ceremonies and medical concoctions alike. One monk's diary from 1372 described licorice as a holy root which tames the fire within and opens the lungs to angelic breath. Which, while perhaps a bit dramatic, isn't entirely wrong if you've ever experienced the soothing afterglow of a licorice tea when your throat's on strike. And it wasn't just for illness. Traveling performers, town criers, and monks with particularly long sermons often kept licorice tucked in their robes to chew between acts. It kept the voice supple, the breath sweet-ish, and the mind focused. Kind of like a medieval throat lozenge that came attached to a twig. So here you are, sitting on a low bench, chewing gently. The sweetness coats your mouth, calms your cough, and mutes the itch at the back of your throat. You breathe easier. Your voice returns, soft, husky, but clear. Brother Thomas passes by, notes your licorice stick, and gives a rare thumbs up. Finally, he says, something that doesn't involve fire or poultry. You nod, content. For now, at least. Because in this world, when something so simple works so well, you hold on to it. Chew slowly. Savor the root. Let it lull you like the hum of monks in prayer, warm and steady in the dusk. You're sipping licorice root tea now, your throat warm and soothed, but your healer doesn't look entirely satisfied. She watches you closely, then tilts her head in that unsettling, we're about to try something drastic, way. You need a reset, she murmurs. Before you can ask what that means, a tray is set down in front of you. It's empty. Not because they forgot the food, because there isn't going to be any. Welcome to the medieval cleanse, therapeutic starvation. In the Middle Ages, fasting wasn't just a spiritual exercise, it was medical protocol. If your body was acting out, you stopped feeding it. No meat, no dairy, no bread. Sometimes no water. The belief was that illness stemmed from excess, too much blood, too much bile, too much food clogging the inner sanctum of your being. So the solution? Deny. Cleanse. Suffer nobly. It wasn't entirely nonsense. Fasting can reset digestive processes, reduce inflammation, and in limited doses, even support immune function. Of course, medieval practitioners weren't exactly consulting peer-reviewed studies. They were going off scripture, superstition, and centuries of monks insisting that hunger made you holier and somehow harder to kill. Historians still argue whether the health benefits of these fasts were due to reduced intake of spoiled or contaminated food, or if the body genuinely benefited from brief starvation cycles. Likely both. If your last meal was moldy rye or pigeon meat of dubious origin, not eating for a day was probably the healthiest thing you could do. And the fringe ideas? Oh, plenty. Some believed that during fasts, the body produced a purifying vapor that could drive out demons. Others insisted dreams became prophetic if you went long enough without eating. One text recommended staring into the flame of a candle while fasting to burn impurities with the eye of the soul. Dramatic, sure, but if your only alternative was another chicken therapy session, maybe staring at a candle wasn't so bad. In monasteries, fasting days were scheduled and severe. Bread and water only, if you were lucky. Total silence. Sometimes isolation. Some took it further, voluntarily locking themselves in small cells to purge both body and spirit. Others simply curled up by the fire and waited to feel clean again. But despite the austerity, there was something powerful in the pause. You, now belly empty, begin to feel something unfamiliar: stillness, clarity, a strange hum in the background of your thoughts, like your body finally has room to listen. There's no soup, no potion, just time, water, quiet. And maybe, just maybe, it's working. Your gut, which has been churning like a possessed butter churn for days, finally settles. Your fever stays gone. Your mind clears. Your breathing slows. It's not miraculous, but it is real. Gentle. Solid. Brother Thomas walks by, holding his own empty bowl. Day 3, he says with a dry chuckle. Haven't spoken to God yet, but I think my liver's forgiven me. You smile. Because somehow, amid all the madness, not eating might be the sanest thing you've done all week. It's a reminder that sometimes, the cure isn't more. It's less. Less food. Less frenzy. Less fear. And for now, that's enough. The fasting fog has lifted. Your stomach feels hollow but oddly content, like it's finally had the last word in a long argument. You're thinking maybe, just maybe, you're turning a corner. Until someone in the dormitory screams. And suddenly, your healer's running, waving a torch, shouting about pest spirits and mattress rights. You follow, because of course you do, and what you witness next is part exorcism, part bonfire, and entirely medieval. They are setting the patient's mattress on fire. This is no ritual accident. It's a genuine treatment, burning bedding to kill what's festering inside it. Because in the age of the Black Death, where fleas, lice, and bacteria all rode shotgun in your linen, the fastest way to disinfect a space was with fire. And, brace yourself, this one worked. Let's be clear, medieval people didn't understand why fire helped, but they absolutely noticed that torching a plague bed often meant fewer people got sick. Fleas, ticks, lice, mites, none of them like fire. Neither do many bacteria. Add in the psychological cleansing of literally watching disease go up in smoke, and you've got a surprisingly effective, if smoky, method. Historians still argue whether this practice originated as a spiritual purge or a practical one. Likely both. Some communities viewed fire as a divine purifier, capable of driving out demonic illness. Others simply noticed that, after a good mattress bonfire, the sick room smelled better and nobody else got boils. And, of course, there were variations. In Germany, beds were sometimes sprinkled with sulfur before burning to release the foul humors. In Italy, bedding was doused in vinegar and rosemary first, making for a tragically aromatic blaze. One London doctor in 1352 insisted that playing a lute during the burning calmed the pestilence. Music therapy meets fire hazard. Why not? The fringe ideas are pure medieval gold. Some healers believed that spirits of illness hid in beds. So after burning the mattress, you had to jump over the flames 3 times to confuse the spirits and prevent them from following you. One monk claimed that if a feather floated during the burning, it meant the soul of the sick was ascending. Another simply screamed every time he smelled burning wool, possibly unrelated, but haunting all the same. You, standing outside the smoking room, can feel the heat against your cheeks. There's something satisfying about the finality of it. The mattress is gone. The fleas are gone. The air, though acrid, feels cleaner. The sick patient, now lying on a fresh pile of straw wrapped in new linen, breathes easier. His fever dips. You catch his eye. He nods. It's better, he rasps. And you believe him. Because in a world where rot and filth cling to every surface, fire is the ultimate cleanser. It's not gentle. It's not subtle. But it's swift. Effective. Final. Later, you find Brother Thomas stacking straw in your room. Just in case, he mutters. You help him. Silently. Because tonight, you understand. Sometimes, to heal, you have to let the old thing burn. The embers from the mattress bonfire have cooled, and you've swapped your bedding for a slightly less lumpy pile of straw. You're alive, mostly upright, and starting to appreciate the quieter rhythms of recovery. But you still carry that shadow of unease, the feeling that illness might sneak back in any moment, like a thief slipping through a crack in the door. So, naturally, someone hands you an amulet. It's a lump of metal on a string, crudely hammered into a disc. On one side is a barely legible engraving of a saint, probably Sebastian, though it might also be a startled chicken. On the other, a tiny etching of a cross. This is no fashion accessory. This is your next line of defense, the medieval metal charm. People wore these amulets not just for show, but with conviction. They were believed to ward off everything from fevers and plague to nightmares and demonic possession. And while their effectiveness was never proven in a lab, shocking, right, the impact they had was very real, at least on the mind. The psychological effect of amulets is now well documented. A sense of safety, protection, and faith can lower stress, which in turn boosts immunity. Back then, they didn't know about cortisol or T-cells. But they knew this. People who believed they were protected often did better. Historians still argue over the true purpose of these charms. Were they religious artifacts, magical talismans, or just symbolic placebos? Probably all three. Some were blessed by priests, others inscribed with prayers, and a few simply forged from holy metal, like iron from monastery gates or swords used in crusades. And of course, the fringe is where things get deliciously odd. In parts of rural France, charms had to be bathed in moonlight for 3 nights to be awakened. In Bohemia, one type of plague amulet was made from melted down church bells. One healer claimed that burying your old tooth with a coin and wearing the coin as an amulet would keep sickness from ever returning to your mouth. Medieval dentistry was a special kind of horror. There were even regional charm recipes: iron against evil spirits, silver against moon madness, and bronze for balance. One monastery offered custom charms for a small donation, each one blessed by 3 saints and half a bishop. Not sure which half? You tie the amulet around your neck. It's heavy, cool, and oddly comforting. It swings with your steps, tapping against your chest like a heartbeat reminder that you are, for now, still very much alive. And the village notices. People nod as you pass. He's protected, they whisper. You don't correct them. Maybe you are. Later, a small girl approaches, clinging to a faded rag doll. Does it work? She asks, pointing at the amulet. You smile. I haven't gotten worse. She nods solemnly. That's something. And it is. In a time of unpredictable illness, mysterious treatments, and remedies that involve chickens and burning furniture, something that helps you feel safe is worth its weight in iron. So you wear the charm. Not because it repels germs, but because belief, comfort, and a little well-placed metal might be all the medicine you need to walk forward, one healed step at a time. You've got your metal charm swinging, your lungs clear, your limbs mobile, and for once, your skin isn't a battlefield of rashes and blisters. Life feels almost normal. But then a familiar itching returns, low on your arm, spreading fast. You peel back your sleeve and there it is, an angry red patch, swelling like it's auditioning for another round of medieval chaos. Plaster, Brother Thomas mutters, eyeing your skin. We'll use the strong one. And by strong, he means unthinkably disgusting. Because today, you're getting a healing paste made of dung and rot. That's right, certain medieval remedies involved applying mixtures of cow dung, fermented plant mush, and even spoiled meat to the skin. And horrifying as that sounds, there's a small, stomach-churning twist: sometimes it worked. See, while these concoctions are the stuff of modern nightmares, they often contained enzymes and bacteria that competed with or killed more dangerous pathogens. Plus, the plant matter, like garlic, nettle, or yarrow, offered genuine antimicrobial effects. And dung? Well, cow dung in particular, when aged properly, produces certain nitrates and organic compounds that have minor healing properties. Not ideal, but plausible. Historians still argue about whether these so-called rot plasters were effective or just exercises in tolerance. Some suggest the occasional success was due to immune stimulation. Essentially, your body panicked at the horror being slathered on and redirected its healing efforts immediately. Others believe that certain microbes in the mix did the dirty work of fighting infection. Then come the fringe beliefs. In England, some healers insisted the dung had to be moonset, harvested from animals who grazed during specific lunar phases. In parts of Scandinavia, the dung was blessed with a prayer, then sung to, because apparently, serenading compost enhances its vibe. And in the Holy Roman Empire, one recipe mixed pig dung with honey and rose water. For elegance, presumably. Some of the more potent pastes were fermented over days, sometimes weeks, in clay pots sealed with wax. The smell? Let's just say it lingered longer than your fever. Applying it was a ceremony of gags, winces, and tight-lipped muttering. And here you are now, sitting on a stool while a novice smears a thick, greenish-brown goo onto your arm. It's warm, sticky, smells like regret and the inside of a compost bin. You clench your jaw. The healer nods approvingly. That means it's fresh. The paste is then wrapped with linen and left to sit overnight. You're told not to scratch, move too much, or go near an open flame. But the next morning, the redness has faded. The swelling has stopped. Your skin, though a bit traumatized, is intact. Something in the muck did its job. You change the bandage, trying not to inhale too deeply. Brother Thomas claps your back, careful to avoid the paste. Sometimes, he says, the worst things bring the best healing. You don't argue. You can't. Your skin is proof. And in this world, where logic and lunacy coexist in every herbal brew and boiling foot bath, even dung can be divine. The dung plaster is off, and your skin, miraculously, is whole again. You've endured soot, slime, leeches, steam, starvation, and a close encounter with burning furniture. Naturally, the next step in your treatment involves soup. But not just any soup. This is onion broth, a potent medieval comfort elixir with one unexpected twist. It's always served with a prayer. You sit on a wooden bench near the hearth, and a nun ladles out a steaming bowl. The broth is pale gold, flecked with herbs, and smells strongly of onion, garlic, and perhaps the faint whisper of turnip. Before handing it over, she bows her head and softly mutters a blessing, invoking Saint Luke, patron of physicians. You accept it with reverence. Because here in the sick ward, this isn't just food, it's medicine. Onion broth was a staple of medieval healing not because it was fancy, but because it worked. Onions contain quercetin, a powerful antioxidant and anti-inflammatory agent. Garlic adds allicin, known for its antimicrobial properties. The warm liquid itself replenishes fluids and electrolytes, essential for patients weakened by fever, diarrhea, or fasting. Even the salt, precious and often rationed, wasn't just for flavor. It helped maintain hydration and balanced the body's chemistry in a way few other ingredients could. So yes, this humble bowl of broth, whispered over and handed with care, could actually save lives. Historians still argue whether the healing came from the ingredients or the ritual. Because alongside the soup came community, touch, attention, and hope, something no leech or burning rod could offer. And that might have made all the difference. Of course, not every bowl was a guaranteed miracle. Some recipes got ambitious. In rural Italy, eel blood was sometimes added to enrich the soul. In Saxon texts, old bread soaked in onion beer formed the base, gruel so thick it stood up on its own. One French healer insisted broth worked best if stirred only with the left hand. Another suggested reciting the Lord's Prayer with each swirl. Whatever it took, right? Then there was the Three Saints soup, brewed in certain convents, onion, garlic, leeks, plus herbs gathered from gardens dedicated to Saint Raphael, Saint Sebastian, and Saint Bridget. A holy trinity of herbs, if you will. The sick drank it, rubbed the leftovers on their chest, and even dabbed it onto cloths worn around the neck. You sip your own bowl slowly, feeling the warmth slide down your throat and settle in your belly like a sleeping cat. You're not healed yet, but something inside begins to unclench. The heat soothes. The salt revives. The onion bites gently, like a nudge from an old friend. A novice walks past and nods. She says if you finish the whole bowl without swearing, the saints work faster. You grin, take another sip, and whisper a thank you, not just to the cook, but to whoever first thought to mix prayer with soup. Because in this long, strange journey through medieval madness, this humble broth might just be the most sacred medicine of all. The broth is gone. Not a drop left. And for once, you feel full without being afraid of what your stomach might do in protest. The ward is quiet now, lit only by the soft flicker of lanterns and the occasional cough from deeper within. Just when you think you might rest, the infirmary door creaks open, and a monk shuffles in with a tray of glass bottles. This, he says proudly, is monastery infusion. You recognize the scent before he even explains. Herbs. Honey. A faint note of vinegar. This brew has been fermenting for weeks in a dark cellar, tended by careful hands and watched over with reverence. These monastery infusions were the closest thing to pharmaceuticals the medieval world had, complex, potent, and sometimes surprisingly effective. The recipe? Always a secret. Passed down through generations of monks who balanced prayer with pharmacology. But common ingredients included elderflower for colds, horehound for cough, valerian root for sleep, and meadowsweet, a natural painkiller containing a compound similar to aspirin. Some were alcohol-based, preserving the medicinal extracts in wine or ale. Others were brewed as teas or syrups. All were intended to strengthen, soothe, and restore. And as much as medieval medicine gets mocked for its chickens and combustibles, these infusions were often grounded in legitimate botanical wisdom. Historians still argue over just how much the monks knew. Some claim it was pure trial and error, recorded meticulously in illuminated manuscripts. Others suggest there was deeper knowledge passed quietly from ancient texts, preserved through centuries of turmoil. What's clear is this: monastic infirmaries were the beating heart of healthcare in medieval Europe, and their brews carried more than just flavor. Of course, there were plenty of peculiar variations. One Benedictine formula required harvesting herbs only after midnight while barefoot. In Provence, monks used a blend infused with rose petals and powdered pearl, because if it didn't cure you, at least you'd smell like aristocracy. And in one Swiss monastery, the infusions were stirred while reciting psalms backwards. Why? To confuse the sickness, naturally. You're handed a small glass of the amber liquid. It's thick, slightly sweet, with an aftertaste of cloves and pine resin. You sip. It burns gently on the way down, warming your chest and settling somewhere behind your ribs like a candle being lit. Your breathing slows. The edge of pain around your shoulders softens. Your mind, usually cluttered with medieval catastrophes, begins to quiet. Brother Thomas leans in. This one's from the root cellar. Aged 6 weeks. Only for the lucky ones. You raise an eyebrow. How lucky? He smirks. Well, you're still upright. And so you sit, nursing the brew like a precious relic, feeling the herbs move through you, not magically, not instantly, but with a kind of slow confidence that tells your body, we've got this. Maybe the saints helped. Maybe it's the alcohol. Maybe it's just the comfort of someone remembering your name when they poured it. Either way, tonight, you sleep. You wake up wrapped in warm linen, the last sip of monastery infusion still clinging to your tongue like a ghost of cloves. The ward is quiet, softer than usual, and for once your limbs feel unremarkable. No throbbing, no burning, no cold sweat creeping up your back. Could this be what better feels like? Before you can get too comfortable, the healer returns, not with more potions, but with a small, rust-colored horseshoe. Under your bed, she says, sliding it beneath your straw mattress without waiting for questions. For protection. From the air. This isn't just housekeeping, it's medieval science meets spiritual insurance. Placing iron objects under the bed was a widely practiced, if peculiar, method to ward off evil air, illness, and the things people couldn't quite name. It was part superstition, part hygiene, and part pest control. See, iron had a reputation in the Middle Ages. It was believed to repel evil spirits, deflect curses, and anchor a sick room against the unseen. But it had a practical use too. Iron objects heated and hammered in fire released trace minerals into the surrounding area. And placed beneath bedding, they could help deter rodents, fleas, and other medieval miseries. Indirectly, they helped you stay healthier. Historians still argue whether the iron itself had any measurable protective effect or if the ritual of placing it, and the belief it brought comfort, was the real medicine. Either way, many households had at least one protective item hidden beneath their sleeping space. Horseshoes, nails, blades, even rusted keys, each with its own lore. And oh, the fringe details. In some Welsh villages, people whispered prayers into the iron before placing it. In Transylvanian law, only iron forged on a Tuesday could repel breathing shadows, which, to be fair, sounds like an excellent reason to stay in bed. Some monasteries blessed their infirmary nails, claiming they carried the protection of Saint Eligius, patron saint of metalworkers. Your own horseshoe is curved just so, like a crescent moon. The healer pats your mattress. It'll catch the bad air before it rises, she says with a wink. And maybe keep the rats away. It's strangely comforting. Another invisible layer of protection in a world full of very visible threats. You rise slowly, your joints cooperating like teammates who finally stopped arguing. The room smells of thyme and ash, the window cracked to let in the dawn. You stretch, and for the first time in weeks, your body doesn't protest. It exhales with you. Beneath your bed, the iron rests. Silent, unshining, and steady. Not a potion, not a prayer, but a presence. A reminder that even in the most unlikely places, healing sometimes lies in the smallest gestures. A bent piece of metal. A quiet belief. A little rust between you and the world. And as you sit by the hearth, sipping a cup of something mild and minty, you realize this wasn't just survival. This was resilience, forged day by day, strange cure by stranger cure. The iron under your bed hasn't moved, and neither have you, not out of exhaustion, but from something close to peace. Your body has quieted, your fever has gone, and the healers seem content to hover less, fuss less, worry less. It's been weeks, but your name no longer makes them whisper in doorways. You've survived. And yet, they're still watching one last thing. Your head. Your expressions. The way you wince slightly when sunlight touches your eyes. Aches in the skull, one monk asks. Flashes of light. Whispering wind behind the ears. You nod. Slowly. He sighs and reaches for the final frontier of medieval cures, one so infamous, so extreme, it deserves its own dark ballad. Trepanation. You don't move. You're not sure you can. Because trepanation, drilling a hole in the skull to relieve pressure, purge spirits, or let the humors out, was the medical equivalent of opening the back panel on a cursed machine and hoping nothing jumps out. But before you scream and bolt, let's set the scene. In the Middle Ages, trepanation was a last resort. A desperate, terrifying, and, in rare, strange cases, effective solution. If someone had a head wound that swelled, or symptoms of seizures or madness, healers believed pressure in the brain was the problem. And the fix? Open the skull. Let the air flow. Allow the vapors to escape. Surprisingly, this wasn't just superstition. Trepanation, in specific trauma cases, like skull fractures or hematomas, might have saved lives. Releasing pressure from bleeding under the skull can prevent death. Modern neurosurgery sometimes does something eerily similar, just with anesthesia and way fewer wood shavings. Historians still argue how many people truly benefited from it. Some skulls show signs of healing, meaning patients lived for months or even years afterward. Others show clean holes with no healing, indicating the patient didn't make it past the bone saw. The tools were brutal: hand drills, scrapers, knives. The setting was worse: no anesthetic, just strong arms to hold you down and maybe a prayer or two screamed between clenched teeth. Blood. Bone dust. Hope. And the fringe? Always. Some practitioners believed the hole needed to be an exact size to match the patient's zodiac sign. Others insisted only left-handed monks could perform the procedure properly. In parts of Eastern Europe, the hole was capped with a tiny silver disc to trap the escaping demon. Fashionable and functional. Your own healer, seeing your panic, waves the idea off. No trepanation today, she chuckles. Your pressure's fine. The whispering's just tinnitus. You exhale. Slowly. Instead, she presses a cool cloth to your forehead, infused with mint and elderflower. Sometimes, she says, it's not about letting something out. It's about letting your body rest. So you do. You lie back, head safe, skull intact, and listen to the soft rustle of robes, the crackle of fire, and the hum of a world that's begun to move on without you. You've made it. Through fire, feathers, fungus, fasting, and fermented remedies. Through burns, boils, and bed-borne exorcisms. You've chewed charcoal, swished urine, cuddled chickens, and drunk pearl dust. And you've lived to tell the tale. Not everyone did. But you're still here. And now, as the monastery falls into shadow, and the village outside fades into dusk, you lie back in your straw-filled cot, body warm beneath linen that no longer itches, lungs filled with air that no longer stings. The herbs have done their work. The rituals, bizarre and beautiful, have passed. And the flickering candlelight plays gently on the stone walls, dancing like old memories. You're no longer afraid. Not of the cough, the fever, or the strange prayers whispered over soup. You've faced the worst, and come through, patched with braid, bandaged in mud, and guarded by onions. Outside, a breeze rustles the leaves. It's soft now, not a carrier of plague or pestilence, but a lullaby. You hear someone singing far off, low, lilting, a tune meant for closing days and opening dreams. Your charm still rests on your chest. The iron horseshoe remains tucked beneath your bed. Your breath, once ragged and rasping, is smooth now. Slow. Gentle. The kind of breath that carries no fear, only rest. You've earned this. So close your eyes. Let the quiet hold you. Let the candle burn low and the sounds of this strange, starlit world soften until they become a whisper. You're safe. You're whole. And, for now, you are healing. Sleep well, traveler of time and tinctures.